The High National Security Court has detained an Israeli Mossad officer named Elan Grebel for spying on Egypt and threatening its national security. The Egypt security apparatuses have been monitoring the suspect since he entered the country in February. Videos were taken of him around Tahrir Square during the post-25th January uprising protests in front of the two churches in Cairo while sectarian clashes were taking place.
This is the first time I hear that a spy is under investigation, because normally the espionage cases are first completed, and perhaps after many years they can declare or talk about it.
Several pictures of Grapple were released by Egypt's apparatuses showing him in Israeli army uniform and also in Tahrir Square, which was the symbolic heart of protests that brought down Mubarak. Political activists deemed the operation as a move that could strain Israel's relation with Egypt's new leaders.
The second session in the trial of Egyptian businessman Tarek Abdelrazek, who is accused of spying and recruiting agents in telecoms firms for Israel's intelligence agency Mossad, was wrapped up with a postponement of the trial till February 12th. The deferral was to allow the defendant's lawyer to examine the investigations and to refer the defendant to medical examination for any signs of torture or beatings. Abdelrazek was arrested last month in Cairo as part of an Israeli spy ring, which included 2 Israeli officers. The 2 Israelis are being trialed in absentia, and the Egyptian authorities have notified Interpol. Tarek Abdelrazek Hussein, 37, is the owner of an import-export firm, and he was arrested in August on charges of providing Israel with information about Egyptians in telecommunication companies who could be recruited to spy in the 3 countries. Israel has denied involvement in the affair.
Cases like these are not limited to Egypt alone. Lebanon has already filed a complaint to the United Nations regarding Israel's espionage inside the country and has arrested dozens of individuals, including security officials and telecommunication employees, on suspicion for spying for Israel inside Lebanon.
All right, this is disturbing. A new message from a senior member of Al-Qaeda to the Libyan rebels on the ground. Keep up the fight against Muammar Gaddafi. Do not retreat, says this Al-Qaeda leader to the rebels. So how much do we really know about these rebels, and could they actually become a bigger threat than Gaddafi himself? These are the questions when you start getting these situations mixed up on the ground. Mike Baker's here, former CIA covert operations officer, to help sort this all out. You know, that's disturbing. Obviously, you know, no matter what you say in this thing, we're on the side of these rebels. I mean, that's become pretty clear, right?
Absolutely.
And now, so Al-Qaeda and we're on the same side, I guess, in this.
Well, when you talk about, you know, whether this thing was ill-conceived or rushed into or not, this is one of the big questions, obviously. Who is the opposition that we're supporting? And make no mistake, there's a big question mark there.
President Obama has said he's not ruling out, he's not ruling in any arming of the Libyan rebels. We're just getting a statement in from the White House on these reports earlier. Reuters saying that there was a secret order signed by the president, an order authorizing the assistance. Covert U.S. government support for rebel forces in Libya, and only moments ago, the New York Times reporting that the CIA is now in Libya aiding rebel forces who are fighting Muammar Gaddafi.
Well, the Libyan opposition have confirmed that they are holding 8 soldiers. These are special forces soldiers who had been escorting a diplomat. The diplomat is not in custody. In fact, he's negotiating, among other things, for their release, which is expected later on today or tomorrow. They were part of a group that flew into a town called Sanoug, about 30 kilometers, that's about 18 miles south of Benghazi, with the mission to actually establish contact, as the Secretary of State for Defense was saying, with the Libyan rebel movement. They have set up an interim government there, and the idea was to try and make contact with that and establish what needs they have. In the first instance, humanitarian needs. Bear in mind that the Black Watch are on standby for a possible humanitarian mission if that's required, and in the sort of deep background will be under consideration, but certainly nowhere near any kind of operational planning, would be possibly to embed special forces with the Libyan rebels, if that's a decision that the Prime Minister would take in cahoots, if you like, with American allies and others in Europe.
Violent protests rage out of control in the Arab world. In Bahrain, the riots turned deadly as police cracked down on the protesters. At least 3 people killed and more than 200 others are hurt. Thousands of demonstrators call for more say in the government of the key U.S. ally.
In Yemen, protesters defied calls for calm from the military, pressing ahead with their campaign to oust that country's president.
And a day of rage now underway across Libya. Amateur video capturing deadly clashes between protesters and pro-government groups. More than a dozen, we hear, are dead.
In Iraq, security forces opened fire on protesters as they called for political reforms. Some government buildings actually set on fire there.
And next to Iran, thousands of pro-government supporters gathered to hear the country's supreme leader railing against opposition forces.
The influx of refugees fleeing uprisings in the Arab world is driving a wedge between EU states. Some are calling to reinstate temporary or even permanent border controls within the Union, unseen since the Schengen Agreement came into force 16 years ago. RT's Daniel Bishop reports Europe might have opened the floodgates for trouble.
The dream of European integration goes off the rails. In a bitter feud between 2 of the EU's founders, France blocked all train services from Italy after finding carriages full of African migrants. Italy had handed out residence visas, allowing travel in the European Union. That's shattered the trust on which the EU's visa-free regime relies.
It has shown a kind of mutual mistrust between 2 partners, between France and Italy. France considering that Italy has not implemented in a good way the rules.
For thousands fleeing the violence in North Africa, Italy is the nearest EU border. Security experts who've studied the country's patrols say they're under strength. But fellow member states argue they shouldn't have to pay for Italy's mistakes.
Are we responsible of the fact that the Italians are just on the sea with people coming from outside and are not able to fix the problem? We are not criminals, terrorists, madmen. We don't want them here.
Rome has protested to the French embassy for, quote, violation of European principles.
Tonight's intelligence report looks at new questions about U.S. airport security.
Our investigative reporter Chuck Gowdy joining us tonight with details. Chuck.
Kathy Allen, the Inspector General for Homeland Security, raised new questions of security after looking at 6 of the nation's busiest airports. Federal officials and the Chicago Department of Aviation declined to say whether O'Hare was one of the airports cited for underreporting security breaches. 5 of the 6 airport names were redacted. Only the Newark, New Jersey airport was identified as the Transportation Security Administration today was ripped on Capitol Hill. A passenger walks past a secured checkpoint at Newark's main airport to kiss his girlfriend goodbye, causing a shutdown of the country's 14th largest airport. Breaches such as this prompted New Jersey Senator Frank Lautenberg to ask Homeland Security's Inspector General to identify what he called gaping holes in our airport security system. The result, this report concluding nearly half of the security breaches at the nation's top airports go unreported to TSA headquarters, making it more difficult to spot dangerous weaknesses in the system and fix them.
TSA's got to be a lot smarter, leaner, and tougher, and we want to help them get there.
TSA's oversight of the process for screening employees prior to giving them an access or security badge did not ensure that the employees were fully screened.
That hole allowed this man, an illegal immigrant from Nigeria, Bimbo Oyewole, to work as a security supervisor at Newark's airport while using the identity of a New York City man who was murdered 20 years ago. The security supervisor did not work for TSA, but had access to sensitive areas of the field, including the tarmac. And in another incident, this man, Ram Porat, was arrested Sunday morning when he was found sitting in an empty Southwest airline plane at Nashville International Airport. The hearings come just a week after the American aviation system nearly came under attack again by Al-Qaeda, using new tactics and new bombs. This time, the plan devised by Yemen-based operative Ibrahim Hassan al-Assiri was thwarted by the CIA before the bomb came near a U.S.-bound jetliner. TSA seems to be suggesting this is a failure to communicate and that there is interagency confusion about the meaning of security breach. Tonight, a TSA official in Chicago tells us they're in the process of implementing the Inspector General's recommendations by developing a single definition of the term security breach and revamping their data tracking system to make sure information from local offices makes it to the Home Office in Washington. And we've also found out tonight that in 2011, TSA found 125,000 items that were prohibited, took them from passengers, including 1,300 guns.
1,300 guns.
Think of how many a day that is.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Chuck, thanks.
Okay.
Two separate inquiries are now underway to find out how thousands of people were allowed into the country without the proper checks. Last summer, the Home Office began a pilot scheme to relax the controls for those considered a low risk, but officials went much further than allowed. Border checks were dropped even for travellers from outside Europe. Biometric scans were abandoned, fingerprints were not verified, names were not checked against the warning index of people wanted by the authorities. Brodie Clark, the head of the UK Border Force, has been suspended, along with a handful of other senior officials. It's alleged he decided to open up the borders on some occasions, disobeying ministers. When the Home Secretary was told about this, she's said to have reacted with incredulity and anger. She's ordered an investigation and warned that if there's evidence the law has been broken, criminal charges could be brought. Border staff have been under pressure to reduce the queues at airports. Labour are questioning whether government cutbacks are undermining security.
This is a pattern that's developing where what the government tries to do is it always tries to blame the staff, but actually they're cutting the number of staff by 5,000, and in addition they're making decisions which make it more difficult for the staff to do their job.
It is highly embarrassing for the Home Secretary after all the tough talk on immigration and security. Theresa May is expected to say the failings are due to individuals, not the system.
The government strategy, known as Contest 2, is expected to make clear the strength of the terrorism threat. It will claim Al-Qaeda terrorist cells based in the UK are now the most numerous and capable in Europe. Cells that apparently have close links with the organisation's leadership in Pakistan and Afghanistan. The report is expected to suggest the structure of Al-Qaeda is likely to change in coming years, with an increase in self-starter cells that operate independently. It will also emphasise the very real threat of a chemical, biological or nuclear attack in the UK. So as terror evolves, the UK's greatest threat remains unchanged, that of groups linked to or influenced by Al-Qaeda. Some question whether the government's new measures are enough to deal with such a threat.
I remember all the things that Mr. Blair, when he was Prime Minister, promised immediately after 7/7. We would deport troublemakers, we would shut mosques that were preaching extremism, a whole range of things that have never really happened.
Nuclear material is all over the world. It is relatively unsecured. And this launched in the U.S. government the idea, the concept, and the program called the Global Threat Reduction Initiative. Now we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars with the U.S. government, with other governments around the world, getting nuclear materials secured around the globe.
An important part of our mission in reducing nuclear dangers was to strengthen the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Nuclear Threat Initiative were trailblazers because through Warren Buffett, they offered $50 million as a seed money for the IAEA to establish a fuel bank.
The Nuclear Threat Initiative is committed to the mission of strengthening global security by reducing the risk of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction.
You can't have nuclear security and a sense of protection of nuclear facilities and material and know-how without the Nunn-Lugar program. And having the Nunn of the Nunn-Lugar program as the head of NTI gives us the most credibility you could have in the world.
We thought at that time that our biggest challenge was going to be to convince the American people that there was a threat of terrorism. It could become nuclear, biological, or chemical terrorism. All of a sudden, 9/11 had changed that.
The Nuclear Threat Initiative has been one of the leaders in focusing on the risks that arise from nuclear arsenals that states have and nuclear weapons usable material that states make, because you could have not just a 9/11, but a nuclear 9/11.
It's tough raising money for reducing nuclear risk in the world. We knew we had to get some people who really were passionate about it, who understood the risk, and we've been very fortunate to have that.
We have always seen our role as a catalyst for energizing states to recognize the dangers, to see a path to address those dangers, and to come together.
Nuclear weapons that are so-called tactical weapons, they're smaller, they're more mobile. They're also just the kind of a weapon that would be a handy thing for a terrorist to get a hold of. So one of the steps that we propose is, let's get hold of all these weapons and let's get rid of them right now.
Another step that can be taken is to eliminate sources of highly enriched uranium, for example, that could be bought or stolen by a terror group. There are research reactors located around the world that use highly enriched uranium, and that's not necessary.
And as energy prices continue to rise, harnessing the power of the atom is seen as a clean source of electricity.
In order to prevent the carbon from being spewed into the atmosphere, which could precipitate the global warming, more and more nations are turning to nuclear reactors, which is a perfectly reasonable action for them to take. But the danger of that is that in generating the fuel for the nuclear reactors, the country has gone through a process which could, if continued for another few cycles, would lead to the same kind of uranium that could be used for a nuclear bomb. The solution to the problem is known. It is to allow countries to have nuclear reactors, which deals with the environmental problem, but under the conditions in which they do not have control of the fuel cycle. They do not process the fuel.
Nuclear power does furnish a lot of hope for mankind, but only if it's safe and only if it's secure. We're also working hard to try to set up the concept of a fuel bank. Based on Warren Buffett's generosity, I was able to go over to Vienna and pledge $50 million to the International Atomic Energy Agency if they raised $100 million additional to set up a last resort fuel supply so that we can say to countries around the globe, you don't have to have your own enrichment.
A dirty bomb is not a nuclear weapon, but it is a real threat. It is a weapon that could wreak havoc in ways far beyond its physical consequences, and that makes it an ideal terrorist weapon.
According to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's fact sheet on dirty bombs,
The panic that could follow an attack might be more harmful than the explosion itself.
The death toll from the panic, or just acting unwisely, I guess would be a polite way to put it, that could very well outweigh the death toll from the radiological weapon itself.
But how much physical damage would a dirty bomb attack cause?
A lot would depend on how big the chemical explosion was and how much radioactivity was involved in it.
It's that uncertainty and the fear of getting cancer from radiation exposure that makes the dirty bomb a potent weapon. While scientists disagree about the health risk of long-term exposure to low-level radiation, the impact could be devastating in other ways.
In some cases, either the cost or the technical barriers will be prohibitive to decontaminating an area. And if people aren't willing to accept the radioactivity in that area, the only feasible option will be to abandon that space,
leaving behind both a reminder of the attack and of the possibility of another.
Training for a toxic attack in London 4 years ago. It hasn't happened yet, it may never happen, but experts now believe terrorists are twice as likely to set off an RDD, a radiation dispersal device or dirty bomb, than either a chemical or biological one. An RDD is radioactive material wrapped around explosives. Left unchecked, its after effects could contaminate whole streets.
The British government are getting increasingly worried about the occurrence of an RDD. We have had a long history of getting prepared for this. There has been a lot of research work in this, but it has started to escalate over recent months.
Ray Gardner from BBC. Over in America, scientists at the Argonne nuclear laboratories are working on countermeasures and then sharing them with Britain.
Let's go.
Here they showed us the isotron spray. It's a liquid polymer gel designed to trap harmful radioactive particles and stop them from spreading. This is what scientists call a lockdown. It's one of the latest methods being developed here in the US to try to contain the effects of a radiological dirty bomb. Now, since Western governments think it's increasingly likely that terrorists may try to detonate such a device, either in the US or in Europe, they're working on ways to try and contain the spread of any radioactive contamination.
What we're doing here is actually decontaminating this surface. So you can see the surface contamination is actually coming off as we peel the coating from the concrete. And it's trapped in this coating, so it's not going to re-aerosolize, or it's not going to present a hazard to the responders who are actually doing the decontamination operation.
This device is a handheld portable device that you put up to the face of the individual victim and determine if he has been exposed to chemical toxins or low-level radiation.
The ocular scanner is one of the latest prototypes, sponsored by the Department of Defense.
Once the test is complete, the user sees no toxins indicated.
And this is the personal dosimeter, which also shows any exposure to radiation. As a precaution, similar devices have already been issued to ambulance trusts in Britain.
Well, you know, this is one of our low-tech solutions. This has no moving parts, no on-off switch, no battery. You'd carry this like you would your driver's license or an ID card. In situations where there's high levels of radiation, this central rectangle would darken and turn shades of blue. The blue squares on here can be used as a reference to estimate what the radiation levels are. The deeper the color, the more radiation there is. It allows him, in a sense, to see the invisible threat of radiation.
If we're in a shopping mall and a bomb goes off, if you are injured, you know it. It's obvious. You're bleeding, you have shrapnel. If it's a radiation dispersal device that goes off in a mall, you may have received a lethal dose, but you don't know. You have no idea what you've been exposed to unless you're properly prepared in advance. And the technologies that we have developed and we're showing you today will help reduce the panic, increase the peace of mind, and help with the cleanup.
After the lockdown comes decontamination. This is the argon superabsorbent gel. It literally sucks radioactive dust out of a building where it's permeated the concrete. A wet vacuum then removes it, and it's disposed of as hazardous waste. It may still be days or weeks before a building can be reoccupied, but, say the scientists, that's now a vast improvement on waiting months or even years.
It's only a drill. Law enforcement agencies have converged on Manhattan.
It's for a wide-scale operation simulating a radioactive dirty bomb attack. CBS News' Jay Dow has the story.
An intricate road checkpoint with several NYPD vans in the Washington Heights section of Manhattan. There is no known threat, but this drill, which began with a massive deployment this morning at the UN, includes the NYPD and 70 other law enforcement agencies from across our region. It will run through Saturday. Practice for the real thing, a dirty bomb, or an explosive device that uses radioactive materials to contaminate the area around the blast site. The officers are working on a specific scenario that involves trying to stop 4 fictional terror cells, which are using radiological materials in an effort to carry out an attack on New York City. New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly says this week New Yorkers can expect to see a heightened presence near bridges, transit hubs, and on the waters around New York City.
We'll be manning up to 400 checkpoints throughout the metropolitan area to test our ability to intercept radiological material. There actually will be samples of radiological material.
The drivers we met at the checkpoint were of course delayed, but on board with the program.
We need to be protected, and whatever means necessary.
You don't have a problem with the holdup?
No, why not? As long as I'm protected, I'm good. It's best to start here. Sooner or later, it's going to get here.
Cesium-137 is a thing that doesn't really exist in nature. It didn't exist in this world, really, until humans invented nuclear bombs. Cesium-137 is something that is only produced by nuclear fission. So if you find cesium-137 on something, or in something, then you know that that thing is atomic age. It's post-1945. Its provenance is sometime after the first nuclear explosion on Earth. If your thing does show traces of cesium-137, it is post-1945. But if it doesn't show traces of cesium-137, it is pre-1945. It's cool, right? That's, I think, the first thing I ever learned about cesium-137, that you can use it to precisely molecularly mark the start of the atomic age. That's one thing that stuck in my mind about cesium-137. The other thing that stuck in my mind about cesium is dirty bombs. Cesium is what counterterrorism people always say would be the sort of thing that would turn up in a dirty bomb attack. Cesium is highly radioactive. It's around. We produce it at nuclear labs because it has industrial and medical uses. And if a terrorist wanted to lace explosives with nuclear material, radioactive material, to cause widespread radioactive fallout but not a nuclear explosion, people always cite cesium as a likely candidate for a bomb of that type. Now get this. Last week, 5 men were indicted in South Africa after a sting operation and a shootout and a chase through a crowded area. They were arrested and charged with trying to sell a bunch of cesium to someone they didn't know was an undercover police officer. The arrests happened apparently at a gas station in Pretoria, South Africa. There were many police officers involved, reportedly a lot of gunfire in the streets, and a foot chase of one suspect through a busy downtown intersection. The suspects were caught with some amount of highly radioactive cesium-137. They didn't just say they had it, they in fact had it in their possession. The cesium had been shielded expertly in lead to make it safe to handle. So someone involved in this, somewhere along the line, was a pro. The stuff was packaged properly, which is comforting to anyone anywhere near those arrests at that gas station. There was no contamination in the area, but it's also worrying in terms of where this stuff came from. These guys got it from someone who knew what he or she was doing in dealing with highly radioactive material, or the suspects knew that stuff themselves. The 5 suspects had allegedly planned to sell that radioactive material as part of a larger sale that included the cesium and an industrial nuclear device. Huh? In the Voice of America and in local South African and Public Radio International reporting on this story, the device these guys wanted to sell along with the cesium is consistently described, I kid you not, as an industrial nuclear device. Police haven't found this industrial nuclear device yet, but the reporting seems to indicate that police believe it exists. They say the asking price for the radioactive cesium that they did find on these guys and the nuclear device to go with it was about 45 million South African rand, which is about $6 million US. You'll recall that we lost our collective minds as a country when the Bush administration concocted the "he wanted to build a dirty bomb" accusation against Jose Padilla, even though none of that was ever proved and all those charges were dropped. Well, now we've got 5 guys arrested actually with radioactive material in a shootout and a big chase with tons of cops through a crowded city and some mysterious nuclear device that police still believe is at large. And we haven't really heard a peep about it. One little blog post so far in the Washington Post from their intelligence reporter Jeff Stein, but otherwise, this is only in the foreign press so far and nobody else picking it up.
So we know 3 things for sure. It was heavy, something was radioactive, and now it's gone. You said one of them spoke English? South African.
The U.S. military also trusts their precious cargo to the port of San Diego. San Diego is one of 17 strategic ports designated by the Maritime Administration of the U.S. Department of Transportation. Both marine cargo terminal facilities can accommodate loading, unloading, storage, retrofitting, and repair of U.S. military cargo and equipment.
Fox News alert on new developments this hour with the stunning and apparently accidental revelation that a weapon of mass destruction has been found at a United States port. Brand new hour of America Live. Welcome, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. A correspondent in California reporting on security at the port of San Diego, asking the assistant director if inspectors have ever discovered a nuclear, chemical, or biological weapon. Watch his response and watch the intervention from the public relations rep.
Not at this location.
But they have found them.
Yes, well.
We can talk. I know that you're the
Off camera, the public affairs officer interrupted. Okay. You never found one in San Diego, though?
I would say at the port of San Diego, we have not.
Have you found one in San Diego?
Trying to.
Again, we'll just talk about the port of San Diego.
Trace Gallagher, live in our West Coast newsroom on this one. Trace?
Kind of like letting the cat out of the bag, Megan, trying to herd this thing back in here. Now, San Diego, as anybody knows, is a major West Coast port. We're talking about cargo ships, cruise ships, tons of military equipment. And they were down there doing a check on the latest technology to detect bad weapons. So I want to play those 2 sound bites for you again and give you more context. The assistant director of the port's name is Al Haller. He is not just the director, he is also a Customs and Border Protection agent. Watch as he answers the first question. He keeps looking to the public affairs officer as if to say, can I say this? Watch the first clip and then listen.
Specifically, you're looking for the dirty bomb. You're looking for a nuclear device.
Correct. Weapons of mass effect.
You ever found one?
Not at this location.
But they have found them.
Yes, well.
We can talk. I know that you're the
Off camera, the public affairs officer interrupted.
So you hear the public information officer interrupts, right? You can't hear what she says, but then they go back. They reset. The correspondent tries to press him further because he did say, yes, weapon of mass effect. So now watch when the reporter goes back at him, and then this time the public affairs officer jumps in for real right at the end. Listen to this.
You never found one in San Diego, though?
I would say at the port of San Diego, we have not.
Have you found one in San Diego?
Trying to.
Again, we'll just talk about the Port of San Diego. I'll follow up later.
You saw that you couldn't see it because of the lower third, Megan. What she said is, we're going to get more information and we'll follow up. Well, he went on to say they didn't follow up for 23 days with information on that. They finally got a statement from the Department of Homeland Security that said, no, the officer was just confused and nervous. There were no weapons found. And then Customs and Border Protection issued this statement, and I'm quoting, saying CPB has not specifically had any incidents with nuclear devices or nuclear materials at our ports of entry. The reason we say that Mr. Haller is not just the assistant port director, he is also a CPB officer, is because you would think he knows from where he speaks. He's got extensive training in these fields. He said it not once, twice, but 3 times that weapons were found. And now DHS, CPB say, no, we don't know of any weapons.
Well, their statement says no nuclear. It doesn't speak to biological or chemical. We don't know what was in his head, but what seems obvious to me is that there's a glaring omission in their statement about what was not found.
In CPB's statement, but remember, DHS told the correspondent that no weapons of mass effect were found, that he misspoke and that he was nervous.
He misspoke, yeah. You know who else is nervous? That public affairs officer.
Yeah.
It's tough to keep your job
Exactly.
when something like that happens and a man in that position makes those kind of statements. Where does the truth lie? We report, you decide.
Well, all we know is the president has been taken off. That could mean anything. He could be ill, he could be injured. We have no...
fuck was that?
Mobilise, Foxtrot 571, Foxtrot 572. Large explosion in vicinity of Liverpool Street Station. Dispatch pump engine and pump ladder to investigate.
Foxtrot 571 responding.
Put it 2 and 3. What just happened, Paul?
Large explosion, Liverpool Street. Could be gas, plane down, or a bomb. We're still trying to contact city police at Bishopsgate.
Got a visual north end of Bishopsgate on 2.
Probable incendiary device. Can confirm ground zero is Liverpool Street. Repeat. Ground zero is Liverpool Street.
All units be alert. India 99.
Has anyone checked for contamination?
Structural damage. Major fires. Proceed with caution.
For some people outside of the blast zone, life continued almost as normal. But after the attack, nothing in our country would ever be the same again.
British authorities have commenced Operation Sassoon, the mass evacuation of London and surrounding areas. Relocation centres have been set up by the government in the north of England for all those made homeless after the attack. From its temporary base in Manchester, the government have introduced controversial new security measures, as well as ordering a complete restructure of the security services.
It's now official. The state of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal is worrying the West. Secret cables released tonight by WikiLeaks reveal a catalogue of fears. The UK has deep concerns, said a senior British diplomat, about the safety and security of Pakistan's nuclear weapons. Despite safeguards at Pakistan's nuclear sites, classified US cables reveal fears of a nuclear confrontation between Pakistan and India. Others warn of nuclear terrorism. Our major concern, wrote the US ambassador to Islamabad, is that someone working in a facility could gradually smuggle enough material out to eventually make a weapon. Again and again, the cables refer to deteriorating security in Pakistan. There's mention of an attack by extremists on a bus carrying nuclear workers. A Russian official told the US that 120,000 people are directly involved in Pakistan's nuclear and missile programs. There is no way, he said, to guarantee that they are all 100% loyal and reliable. Concerns over the security of Pakistan's nuclear materials are not new, but the language used in these confidential diplomatic cables gives us the clearest picture yet of what Western governments really fear: Al-Qaeda or its affiliates getting their hands on enough material from Pakistan to build themselves a crude nuclear device.
Imagine Denver under missile attack from nearby Boulder. Since 2005, Israel has been targeted by 8,000 rocket and missile attacks from Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran has helped fund, train, and arm these terrorist groups. A nuclear Iran is a threat to peace, emboldens extremists, and could give nuclear materials to terrorists with the ability to strike anywhere. The world's leaders can peacefully prevent a nuclear Iran. The time to act is now.
Radiation affects your entire body, but what you're going to see early on is radiation affecting the parts of the body where cells divide very quickly, and that's your gastrointestinal tract. You're going to see nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and fever. The same kinds of things someone has when they're going through radiation treatment for cancer. That will let you know you've had a big dose of radiation.
And again, we're talking about acute radiation poisoning with those symptoms. I want to move out to the wider circumference of people who've been told to stay inside or try to evacuate. What are the effects on small children, and what about pregnant women, and what about breast milk?
Well, you know, one of the big effects that you want to try and prevent is the development of thyroid cancer. And the reason that's a risk, and it's a risk in particular to young children and pregnant women, is that the thyroid gland in your neck takes in iodine. So that comes into your body, it goes into your thyroid gland where you make a thyroid hormone. You can block that, though, by giving people potassium iodide. Those are the pills that are being distributed. You can protect them from thyroid cancer.
Right, but I want to show everybody this pill because we've all been issued them here, these tiny pills. You have to be careful, don't you, about taking them for too long a period, especially children?
Well, you definitely don't want to take them unless it's necessary. If you're being exposed to ongoing radioactive iodine, taking those pills far exceeds any risk. However, they can be a risk to very young babies. They can cause mental retardation. You don't want to use them without guidance. You want to listen to the recommendations and follow them very closely.
Look what happened when the mother was contaminated with cesium during pregnancy. In one single family. Look how many deformations, hair lip, missing eyes, deformed skulls.
These embryos come from hamsters that were fed only contaminated grass from the region of Gomel. The result? Entire litters of deformed animals.